Hello and welcome to our Logistics Landscape Founders Edition webinar. Today we're going to be talking with the great thinkers who developed the technology solutions at the foundation of MercuryGate's transportation management platform. My name is Michael Willard and I'll be turning our webinar over to our moderator in just a moment. Before we begin, I want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees on today's webinar are muted. The session's being recorded and we'll share it with you shortly after it concludes. You can also look for a recording of this webinar in the resources section of our website. That's MercuryGate.com. It should be available later today. Our presenters have a lot of information to share, but we're planning to field your questions at the end of the conversation. Please submit those questions anytime using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll respond to as many questions as possible during our podcast. With that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator. Nick Wilson is MercuryGate's Vice President of Product Marketing. He'll be facilitating today's conversation, starting with an introduction of our panel of MercuryGate founders. Nick?
Hey, thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I do want to start off by thanking those in the audience listening and for your time. We really do appreciate it. And we hope that you find today's discussion valuable and take away a few nuggets that you can think about as you go forward. As Michael said, we're joined today by our founders within the MercuryGate family who have a rich and deep set of experiences and perspectives to share. Guys, I think what would be helpful is if we go ahead and orient the audience by doing a short intro of who you are and how you came into the MercuryGate family. So with that, Steve, let me turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Steve Blau. I'm with the co-founder of MercuryGate TMS. Came into MercuryGate when we founded it back in 2000, located here in Cary, North Carolina. And actually, MercuryGate is my third TMS that I've built. So, keep striving to get it right. And I think we're doing a good job now of delivering a solution that people see a lot of value in.
Pete, how about you?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. And again, we appreciate the opportunity for our MercuryGate clients to listen to this session. Again, my name is Pete Celestino. I'm one of the original co-founders of Trans Solutions. We started the company based out of Cleveland, focused on a freight claim space, and we continue to focus on that space. That's all we do is freight claims, and we help our clients help automate that process to reduce the work effort. And again, we became part of MercuryGate in 2019. So again, Nick and everybody here, we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Pete, well, thank you. And just to give a little bit more color to Pete's background for the audience. So Pete actually founded the company with his brothers. His brothers have since, retired and moved on to other things, but Pete hasn't because I'm convinced Pete doesn't know how to stop working. I do believe that work is in his DNA. And I see that every day because Pete's always working to drive value on behalf of his customers and to make the product better. So Pete, thanks for being here. Thanks for all that you do. Bobby, how about you?
Great. I'm Bobby Darrell from cold and rainy Los Angeles, California. I founded Cheetah because I hated to wait at home for a delivery person or a service tech for most of the day and not know when they would be at me. We save consumers and carriers time and money by optimizing fleets and accurately predicting ETAs for final mile pickup and deliveries, while adapting to continual dynamic live operational changes. We joined the MercuryGate family in April 2021 when Cheetah was acquired by MercuryGate. Thank you.
Bobby, thank you. And I love the fact that you literally thought of Cheetah because you couldn't or you didn't know when your packages were coming, right? It's very pragmatic. And for anybody that's used our Final Mile Cheetah solutions, you see that pragmatism in the solution, right? Bobby's all about solving problems and it definitely comes through. So Bobby, thank you. And then Don, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Don Mabry, and I'm located in Nashville, Tennessee. I co-founded ClearTrack in 2001, which grew into a global supply chain software platform used by retailers, brands, and manufacturers for going on 22 years now to manage the complexity of product sourcing, order compliance, shipment, and order visibility. I had the pleasure of joining MercuryGate back in September of 2022 when ClearTrack was acquired by MercuryGate.
Don, I just want to pick up on that 22 years. So for those of you who are following the dates, a lot was happening right around that 1997 to 2001 timeframe where these companies were being founded. And I was joking with the guys the other day. I bet they didn't realize that fast forward 20 years, we would all be here together and that all of our paths would come together from that time period. So Steve and Pete and Bobby and Don, I do want to thank you for being on our panel today. Let's go ahead and dive in and start off by touching on the logistics landscape, which is why we're here. So it is not new news to anybody here today on the phone that the logistics landscape is ever changing, and it's full of challenges, and on the other hand, it's full of opportunities. We could fill this page and probably 20 more with stats and figures and reports, sometimes of different opinions. But we did go ahead and pull a few that were interesting for this one page. It won't be a shocker that the US Census Bureau reported that Q4 retail sales were up 5%, right? We knew it was going to be up year over year, and commerce climbed higher, right? It had a 6% year over year rate. Again, not a shocker. This actually just came in. I hadn't realized this until just a few days ago. Comscore reported that e-commerce for the first time, I think in the US, topped $1 trillion in the US, which again, I think is a record. That is a huge number. And with high volume comes high returns, which we all know. And we are here in March. We're nearing the end of the return season. And the Wall Street Journal have predicted that in the US alone, there would be about 170 billion in returns. It's probably a little bit higher. That is a staggering number. Every year when we look at that number, I'm just blown away by how much that is, how many packages that is, and what that means in terms of reverse logistics. Of course, we continue down through the year. We see disruption playing out, right? We see it at the macro level with ongoing world conflict, and we see it down to the micro level, down to the lane level with incidents or even weather-related events. Those things are always going to happen. We know that, but they're very difficult to predict. It's also really difficult to get a pulse on the labor market right now. If you look at some of the more recent private reports, it says that it's cooling off. The government reports still remain a little bit bullish. I think what it tells us is that nobody, ourselves included, really have a crystal ball to predict what will the market look like tomorrow, let alone a week from now or a month from now, right? We're going to continue to see differences and fluctuations. And then the last thing I want to touch on, and Pete, I know this is going to cause you to perk up. When you look at the data, right, the industry has reported that there was a big uptick last year in cargo thefts in the US and Canada, which again, I don't think is a surprise to us, but we all recognize how disruptive and how costly that is and how it can lead to dissatisfaction, not only on behalf of us, but our consumers and customers as well. We could probably go on for just an hour talking about data, but that's not why we're here, right? We're here to talk about what a path might be looking forward to help navigate these challenges today and the ones that we don't know about tomorrow. So with that, let's hop to the next slide, Michael. So Steve, I actually want to start off with you. You know, we just finished talking about some of the data and some of the, what's your big picture reaction to what's needed to drive through these challenges in the market today? And in your opinion, is there a general path forward that could apply across the shipment lifecycle?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we just saw a list of trends and challenges we're facing in logistics today. And one thing we know we can count on is that list will be different tomorrow, right? So when you think about what we want to do with automation and so forth, you know, adaptability has to be one of them to be able to respond to what we see. The words autonomous logistics means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But one of the big misconceptions is that it's just about automating route creation. So much more than that. Autonomous logistics goes way beyond routing. It looks at the entire supply chain as a logistics continuum. If we think about moving forward, we need to think about combining transportation planning with workflow effectiveness to maximize efficiencies across the supply chain. Autonomous logistics spans the supply chain participants into a cohesive team using systems integrations, route optimizations, visibility to both goods and processes, and then the communications for both nominal and anomalies as well to the logistics process. Path forward is a unified platform that allows folks to interact in ways that are native to their process, while at the same time providing automation to handle the visibility, carrier payment, and claim settlement, and then taking that data analysis to automatically improve those processes. It is doing those supply chain automations while considering all geographies, all modes, and all participants, making sure it is resilient enough to deal with industry changes and dynamic enough to handle the operational disruptions. I'm excited to be part of an esteemed group of founders here to discuss our vision of autonomous logistics for the supply chain, encompassing transportation perspectives as well as the workflow needs.
So that's what we're actually going to do here today, audience. We're actually going to talk about automation and visibility across the shipment lifecycle and some of the common stopping points that we all face. So with that, I'd actually like to come over to you, Dawn. So Dawn, when you think about today's dynamics, how do you think about autonomous technology and visibility in supply chain compliance, which is an area that maybe I know myself and others may not be as familiar with? And how does that transition into the shipment lifecycle?
Thank you, Nick. Absolutely. No matter the industry, whether it be consumer brands, retailers, manufacturers, distributors, the sourcing and validation of products, a vital upstream process that directly influences the performance of the shipment lifecycle. As with the key areas shared by Steve, the global sourcing space is experiencing similar challenges around resource constraints, shifts in demand, manual processes, and disconnected systems. We all know the importance of the supply chain in keeping the global economy running, but there's been a distinct lack of investment in what's sometimes referred to as the first mile, or that initial 90 days from the point at which an order is placed with a supplier to when it's shipped. These are early stages of the international supply chain that hugely impact the outcome of products and the downstream shipment lifecycle. While the first mile focuses on an often overlooked segment of the supply chain, it stands to benefit greatly from advances in autonomous technologies and visibility by collecting data and applying the information in ways that improve the performance and efficiency of supplier and order compliance activities to improve outcomes. When combined seamlessly with autonomous logistics into a unified platform, applying process and data standardization, connectivity, and intelligence, the combined capability yields increasing returns through improved efficiency, as well as increased agility to unanticipated events, cost savings, higher quality, safer products, improved scalability, and data-driven decision-making.
So Dawn, the first mile of modern supply chains, I think, can definitely stand to benefit from automation and better visibility. I often think of really manual processes, and it's a very complicated area that many of us have to operate in. You mentioned an area many listening in today may not be familiar with, and that is supplier and order compliance. Could you just explain a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Supplier and order compliance means validating that your suppliers are meeting an assortment of regulations, abiding by local and international laws, manufacturing products to the organization's ethical, performance, quality, and even safety benchmarks, a host of ever-changing business requirements on top of that, and more, all prior to authorizing a release of a fully validated order for shipment, which is the key initiation point for a shipment's life cycle if you think about it. Consider the alternative where an inferior or even a dangerous product enters the organization's supply chain and it's not identified until well into its journey. Or even worse, it makes it to the shelf and into your customer's hands, requiring a recall. I'm not sure if you noted in the news recently that the Consumer Product Safety Commission recall of over 2 million air fryers where an internal wire connection could overheat, posing fire and burn hazards. It's really scary stuff. I know I had to double check a fryer that we had received as a holiday gift. Thankfully, we were not impacted. In this scenario, the costs of remediation are substantial and increased exponentially the later in the product's journey the issue was discovered, including potential retrieval and disposal costs, repair or replacement costs, loss of sales, legal fees, brand damage, and regulatory fines, to name a few, all of which can be averted with increased diligence performed during the product's first mile activities. I'm certain the importer in this case is closely scrutinizing their supplier and order compliance processes to identify where corrective action is needed.
Dawn, I wasn't really aware of the air fryer recall, but it's a great example of what can happen if you don't have the right due diligence in that first 90 miles. I'll certainly be checking our air fryers. I wasn't aware of that. So next question for you. What are some operational areas that come to mind where you, in your experience, have seen an opportunity to really apply automation and end-to-end visibility across suppliers, manufacturers, and even other areas like order compliance? What comes to mind?
Oh, yes. Organizations are grappling with multiple areas within that first mile space. Product compliance, social responsibility, and environmental sustainability are common areas where our customers are benefiting from the application of autonomous technologies and seamless visibility across that first mile space. Product compliance areas that stand to benefit from process and workflow automation include testing of products and materials for safety and performance to ensure every directly sourced item meets all safety-related expectations and complies with relevant legal and regulatory requirements. And then there's supplier integrity and social responsibility. That requires organizations to monitor and confirm ethical practices at each point of the supply chain or risk financial penalties, or sometimes even worse, damage brand reputations. An example includes the recently enacted Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act and follow-on guidance requiring importers to police their supply chains to ensure none of the products or raw materials used to make goods are sourced or made from within a prohibited region. And what seems like to be on a daily basis now, we hear about environmental and sustainability issues that are clearly touch points with today's consumers and legislative bodies. In a recent MIT State of Supply Chain Sustainability report, over 1/4 of respondents reported increased pressure from investors to improve supply chain sustainability. In response, many companies are looking to implement more ethical sourcing programs, visibility features, and automated compliance monitoring solutions, allowing them to identify and audit suppliers, track production, and monitor quality control processes. Beyond investors, consumers are weighing in too. According to a recent Gartner Future of Supply Chain survey, 53% of consumers will only do business with companies that practice environmental and social sustainability. And to no surprise, 2/3 of organizations reported increasing efforts to create a more sustainable supply chain.
I know for Steve, right, he's always big on sustainability. I'm sure he perked up there in terms of how important that is. And I think, the 53% is really interesting. 53% of consumers only do business with companies that practice environmental and social responsibility. I think we all feel that on the phone, but I don't really think we all realize how big that is. So I'm glad you shared that, Don. So Don, as we close out on this important first mile area, what are some autonomous technologies that you've experienced that are improving operational efficiency, lowering cost, and helping organizations reduce risk?
Oh, yes. We're confirming success with things like rules-based processes and dynamic workflows that are being applied to complete these manual, time-consuming activities. And it helps you to reduce errors and expedite product compliance management across that whole risk landscape that organizations are struggling with. Another is the application of advanced algorithms and rule sets configured to regulatory, industry, and even the organization's requirements for execution and visibility. Applicable areas here would include things like factory audits to confirm safe working conditions and acceptable manufacturing practices, order inspections for quality and packaging requirements, and even item lab tests to measure a product's performance, features, and safety against predetermined standards. Today's global supply chains wrestle with common themes: distance, time, complexity, dynamic risk, and even enormous data creation. Organizations that are able to harness the power of autonomous technologies and visibility across their first mile operations, they stand the best to be able to adapt and compete in this ever-changing environment. So thanks for allowing me a chance to share some perspectives on this area.
Yeah, well, Don, thank you. And again, I think the area that you just touched upon, this whole idea of sourcing and order compliance, is an area that many of us recognize, but we know that it can be complicated. It feels very far away from a lot of us. So hopefully for the audience, that was valuable. I know it was for me. What I'd like to do now is move on from the order compliance into sort of the planning phase. And Steve, I know you're having some audio issues, which we can all relate to in today's remote environment. Can you hear me? And are you able to hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we sure can. We sure can. You joined right back at the right moment. We're actually getting ready, Steve, to come over to you around the optimization planning. And Don just did a great recap of sourcing compliance. And, I wanted to come over to you, Steve, because when you think about it, right, it's so important to plan effectively from the get-go to have an efficient and effective move in terms of modes and lanes and things like carrier selection, right? I could go on and on with all the different variables. It does feel like this is an area that can be fraught with changing dynamics and information gaps. What's your advice on how to do this well and what to consider?
It's an interesting thing because people tend to get very narrowly focused when they start to think about planning and optimizing, when exactly the opposite should be happening, right? You want to plan movements in as broad of a data set as possible, to allow the full effective and efficiencies to be developed, right? So you want to make sure you're looking at, all transportation modes. You want to consider all move types. And what I mean by move types, such as, inbound moves, outbound moves, returns, cross docks, all those type of things have to be considered to make sure you're being as effective as you can be. Combination of consolidation of orders considers things like cross docking, multimodal, multi-pick and drop. I mean, you get the scenario. And some of those things could happen while the movement's going, as you see that, especially in the final mile world. It encompasses all locations. Again, I often see people sort of siloing down to the, I want to plan out of my facility. Well, you want to plan out of all your facilities and into all your facilities to, again, keep that open. And also looking at keeping the dates as flexible and as the times as flexible as possible, right? The narrower you make all that stuff, the less efficient your optimized plan will be, right? It can't combine things that have to be picked up at the exact minute. And those are kind of some common things we see as we look at stuff. And then, of course, recently, a lot of the thought has gone to reducing the carbon footprint or the carbon used or consumed on given loads, right? And all, when you start to take that whole ethos into consideration, the problem becomes extremely complex. So the more you silo the whole thing, the less effective it is. I often hear things like from folks as well, like, I don't need to optimize because my shipments are so simple. Well, that's only true when you look at them sort of individually, right? When you look at them in total, that becomes a falsehood. And people are often get hung up on the word optimization and feel like it's this complex thing that has to go on. Well, true optimization actually should take away that complexity and make it fairly simple. It doesn't have to involve the real complex type of shipments. They can be simple truckloads, but you want to optimize which carriers you're using on which routes, right? I mean, if you have a low-cost carrier, you don't want to use them as your first 10 routes. You want to put them on the routes that make the most sense, right? So, it's easy to plan a few loads. Complexity goes way up as you add additional or thousands of loads, and you throw in lots of locations. Start to think about taking into account hours of service, driving time, change of delivery dates, operation hours at facilities. You get the idea. That is a couple of facilities with hundreds of orders. The complexity is greatly increased. And then, especially when we think of final mile, right? As delivery things change, orders get dropped, returns get added, those type of things even make it more complex.
Steve, what I hear you saying, right, is that it's better to make sure that you look at the big picture, which is kind of counter to how we often approach problems, right? I think by nature, we think things are easily if we silo them and kind of break them down. But what I hear you saying is that you're actually gonna be way better off if you try to optimize across everything, right? And in totality together. Is that a fair summary?
I think it is. And I think that we tend to silo things because we try to keep it simple, right? So we tend to silo down to keep it simple, even though that simplicity often results in, higher delivery costs, higher labor costs. I mean, you go right down the chain of all the things that happen because you're ineffective and inefficient, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like you said, by nature of sheer volume, things can get complex. And then you add to it how quickly you can get sideways when you have other operational disruptions to an already complex problem, right?
Yep. And I think we went to a large university in the Northeast and we're talking to their grad students, and they're like, well, we don't really need to optimize this. I could plan this. But it quickly becomes evident as you start to add in drivers, hours of service. This guy can pick up at 10 o'clock, but he can only drive for an hour. Now, that's not going to work, right? I mean, well, it may or may not, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, you got to take into account all those things. And it's beyond human comprehension to be able to consider all those in some sort of large volume, or even not even that large, right? I can give you 10 orders with all that complexity and you can't figure out the best way to do it.
Oh, yeah, especially if the delivery windows are tight and you're going to multiple locations. I mean, very quickly, it's unreasonable. And is it also fair to say, Sue, Steve, that really what I hear you guiding us towards is that the goal here is to really create an effective plan right from the get-go that gets executed largely automatically, right? So that you don't need humans thinking about every piece of it. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's the goal here. And it's not, we're talking about, again, optimization here and route planning. That's the goal across all the processes, right? Like you want to flow through all the processes, whether it's creating the order, tendering, optimizing, tendering, track and tracing, all those things should just happen, unless, of course, you get to an anomaly. And then hopefully, as time happens, you get to automate the reaction or the action taken for that anomaly as well, right? So that's the real goal, where you allow your people to focus on the issues, right?
I think that's one of the main things that I've learned from you, Steve, in the years that we've been working together is that if you can get people to focus on the anomalies because you've had a really great plan right from the get-go, you're really going to use your time better, your people's time better. And it's going to lead to not only better outcomes, but better job satisfaction too, right? Because people are focused on things that truly need their attention. They're strategic in nature.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And what's interesting is I often hear, well, I have a bunch of people, I don't want to lay off a bunch of people and start automating everything. Well, that's not the goal here is to grow with the people you have, right?
Exactly.
Not to lay off people or get rid of people. It's to make those people more effective so that as your business grows, you don't have to go hire 100 more people. I mean, that used to be the solution, right? Throw more people at the problem.
Well, Steve, I think you just gave us the perfect segue into the next stop on our shipment lifecycle when you were talking about continuous optimization and the value of data. So what I'd like to do now is pivot back over to you, Bobby. So Bobby, you've been involved in autonomous logistics and dynamic routing for literally decades now, over close to 30 years. You know better than most that driver availability, fuel prices, and capacity are always going to fluctuate. Road and delivery conditions are going to change. I see it in my own hometown every day. Like it seems like every day different roads are closed for different things, and I see vans turning around. It's very challenging to get things to where they need to be. It's all dynamic, and it's hard to manage. What guidance would you give to the audience in terms of approaching continuous and autonomous optimization in the final mile?
Well, I think first of all, what I'd like to do is to just talk a little bit about what autonomous logistics means.
Mm-hmm.
Really, what it means is doing more with less on time with no human intervention. Our systems must continuously optimize, predict, and adapt in our live operations. There's a significant thing that's gone on in the marketplace over recent years with customers and market final mile conditions. Customers can place orders anywhere, anytime, with any suppliers in a pull economy driven by e-commerce. There's also a very significant business shift to home offices that has escalated logistics volumes and complexity with many more on-demand stops. Intertwined with that is really the change in customer experience, service level agreement escalation. Really, the consumer is driving the market. Customers demand deliveries on their schedule, so they want appointments, they want 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour deliveries with accurate, continuous ETAs. In addition, customers expect to be able to change their orders, time, and places where they want things done, and carriers have to adapt and update their environments. Carriers and retailers also have a shift in the way they optimize their orders, drivers, and equipment. Traditionally, routes are pretty, we get a bunch of orders, we optimize them, and we got a perfect plan, and everybody's very happy. And even in the case if we're going to do like next day delivery, we get these orders, but before we leave, things have already changed. So we got to do dynamic routing, and that's all and well. But the reality is, it becomes even more complex. And this is because we're getting on-demand and same-day order changes with add-ons, cancels, reschedules. We got inbound late arrivals of freight, so we have to start doing adaptive changes, not just dynamic, but adaptive, all right? And also, we get operational changes because we get out on the road and there's traffic, there's customer delays, there's driver and equipment failures and all kinds of things. And we have to adapt to this environment. And it really affects the cost of operations. The way we've done it traditionally is to throw people at the problem. We've got dispatchers trying to adjust and drivers trying to adjust. But as you add these huge volumes of transactions coming in and, a sort of fully integrated supply chain, you have to be able to do this more autonomously. The final thing that you're dealing with in this particular area is you've got operational workflow changes. So with reverse logistics is created effectively by failure along the way with, for example, with a customer not at home. And what could happen is that you're required to bring the product back, not necessarily to the distribution center where you started out with, but you may have to drop it back in the case of the medical, drop it at a pharmacy where a customer can pick up the orders. The critical thing here, and the thing that's most missed, is that people don't realize that when you have a route with 20 stops on it and you have one exception on the route, it affects on average half of the orders on the route. So half of those customers, 10 of them are going to be affected. When you have 100 stops on the route, it even gets worse. So it's critical that we realize that the only constant that we have is change. Following that, we also, you look at this and you go, well, that's great. How are we going to do this? Have you done this? How are you going to make autonomous systems? This is a little scary to us. So one of the things that is important is experience. And, with Cheetah and MercuryGate, we've done, I'll give you one case of a same-day courier operations, an office pickup and delivery customer that we operate. We run at 95% to 98% autonomy, more efficiently than was done with dispatchers. And we've been doing this for over 8 years. So you want to start off with somebody and do it with them where they know how to do autonomy. It's not just we dynamically route, meaning we're going to look for a truck we can put an order on. So the next piece of that is that, every one of your companies is different. None of them are the same. You have different customers, you have different operating conditions, you have different constraints, and you want to be able to know when somebody like us comes along and says, oh, we can help you do this, that the first thing I would ask is, what's the plan? So one of the things that we've done is we built an operations and strategic simulator, which validates your business and helps tune the system. So what we do is we take a work cycle of your production data on a specific day, and we feed it into the simulator. And by the way, this simulator also deals with the trucks driving along the streets being simulated with GPSs and the exceptions that are occurring and the arrivals and departures and all those kind of things are operational in the simulator from your real data. And what we can do is we can analyze a day's operation in an hour with full performance metrics, all right? So the beauty about that is we can also implement a phased operation to put the systems in place, because the biggest thing for you is going to be change control. You don't want somebody coming in and totally messing up your operations and then going, oh, well, just give us some time. You need to be able to phase it in consumable chunks that your operation can handle as you go forward. Anyway, that's just touches it on briefly. Hopefully we get to speak to you more and in more detail about this stuff, but at least it gives you some notion of where we are. Thank you.
Well, and Bobby, I want to thank you. And I think as I listened to you, two things really stood out. One, you really call out, we are in the age of the consumer, and that's creating new dynamics for us in terms of the pull economy, where things are expected, where are things. I don't think that's going to change. I think if anything, it's only going to increase. Is that how you would feel about it?
Absolutely. Well, what's happened is we've set the mark, the bar has been set on service levels and what consumers expect. And consumers are the executives running the business as well as you and I. We expect things now,
Right.
So it's not going to get easier. It's going to get more complicated.
And I think the other really important point that you made as well is that I think when all of us think about automation, whatever phase it might be in, I think we naturally are inclined towards a big bang type of approach. Like you got to do it all at once. What I hear you saying is no, actually iterate, start off small and build on that. Is that also a fair summary?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be able to look, this is super complicated. So you have to take small chunks and validate that each piece works properly before you start complicating it even further. You can't stop these operations and look at things, okay, while they're running. So you really, I found this, having done this for many years, I won't even tell you how many years, that the real approach is to do that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I think that's actually a good segue to our next stop on the shipment lifecycle. And you were talking about how consumers are highly decentralized right now. More packages are going to more places than they used to, and that creates dynamics where things can get lost. And I think, Pete, of all the people on the phone, you are probably the one most aware that despite the best laid plans we have, sometimes things go awry, right? Packages gets lost, freight gets misrouted, and it gets damaged. Recently, I heard you talk about the typical recovery process and what that looks like in terms of time and effort and some of the pitfalls. Would you share with the audience some of your perspective and also how they can get to a better place with automation in the claims and settlement area?
All right, thank you, Nick. Freight, we've always looked at freight claims as the underbelly of the supply chain space. It's a process that, unfortunately, due to the fact that our experience is showing that claims normally result in usually half to 1% of all shipments. And I can tell you, during COVID, especially in 2021, our customers had significant claims volumes because the carriers were supply constrained. They didn't have enough trucks to ship the products out, and they were packing the trucks up to the gills to try to get the shipments out to the customers. And that definitely increased the volume of claims that go out there. Again, our focus has been to help our customers automate that process and to streamline that process and get that claim in front of the carrier or insurance third party as quickly as possible. Claims have a limited life. You have to start the process as quickly as possible. If you don't, you will lose the chance to recover from the carrier. And based on, we've been in this space since 1996 and on the cloud since 2001. It takes an average from 30 to 120 days to resolve a claim. Customers that are able to resolve claims in a short time frame obviously have mature processes. And they're able to provide the carriers or insurance parties the respective required information to resolve the claim. But most customers, unfortunately, are not in that position. This is an area that, in most departments has high turnover because it's a stepping stone into other areas within the supply chain or logistics space within an organization. So our goal has always been to make sure that our two solutions, Mercury My Easy Claim and Mercury Carrier Claim, are very easy to use. And I can tell you, we're able to bring out a customer basically the same business day. And once we schedule an implementation call and training, a customer can be off and running within 1 week. If you think about the life cycle of a claim, there's a lot of steps in that process. I mean, you have to get the claim data from the receiving party. In your case, it's your customer. It's a customer that had a shipment that went awry, that's unhappy. You have to gather the documentation. You have to input the data into some way. And customers that don't have a regimented process, in most cases using Excel to track that, and then going onto the carrier website to file the claim. You then have to file the claim with the carrier. You have to then arrange a survey if required, and then follow up with the carrier to make sure you have acknowledgement. I can tell you most recently, probably in the last 30, 60 days, we've had some issues where, carriers, the standard answer is, well, we never got the claim. And we have back-end systems that track when it leaves our systems into their systems. So at least we're able to provide that documentation to the carriers. And then two, what he called a customer has to respond to a carrier's request and then convince them that there's a loss. It's amazing. A carrier will do everything possible to get paid for a shipment as quickly as possible. But when it results in money going back to a customer or their customer, there's delays. Nothing happens very seamlessly and quickly. If a carrier rejects it, you have to then dispute the denial, and then follow up with the carrier to get the resolution, and then make sure you get payment, and then make sure the payment gets applied to a proper account. So there's many steps in that process. And for customers that are doing it manually using Excel spreadsheets, it's a big challenging effort on the customer's part to be productive and effective with the claim process. There are three things that we've done over the last couple of years to help our customers improve and reduce the amount of time to generate a claim. We've developed a method where a customer can provide their internal customer a URL, and they're able to start the claim process right off the bat. It comes electronically to our system. Two, we have a task module within the tool. As we all know, you have to, record and follow up on any action items that need to be done in order to be successful. And the last piece is our applications collect a lot of data, and our customers use the data that's collected. And there's over 140 plus data fields with our application to generate reporting they could then use to go back and work with the respective carriers to improve the process, possibly change the way that you ship a product to a particular zip code, packaging. I mean, there's a host of data that our application captures that can help a customer not necessarily resolve the claim they have right now, obviously, but the goal is to reduce the claims long term, so that they don't have that exposure. Because at the end of the day, you have a customer, it's your customer that is unhappy. So you have to ship them a replacement product, which there's a cost to that. You have to make arrangements to get the product that was damaged returned back to you and to dispose of the product. And that all has a cost to an organization. One of the statistics that came from the TLC, which is a Transportation and Logistics Council based out of New York. They're a trade group focused on a freight claim space. The analysis showed that let's say if a customer writes off a $50 claim, a customer has to, in essence, and they're operating, let's say, at a 2% net profit ratio, they'll have to generate an additional $2,500 in sales to offset that claim. So if you think about that, and if you look at customers that have many claims, I mean, that's a significant impact to the bottom line. And again, claims will always be here until you can replicate the product, but that's going to be outside our lifetime. And again, our goal has always been to work with the clients, and the application is a result of customers' feedback, and to reduce that work effort and for the customers to be successful and bring that money back to their bottom line. Thank you, Nick.
Oh, well, thank you. And every time you share about the impact of a $50 claim, I'm always taken back about how much pressure it puts on the top line sales, but also how it can erode the bottom line as well. It's really staggering, right? And I think my big takeaway from listening to you is that if you can move from spreadsheets and individual emails and documentation and all the manual work in the claim space, you can have a big impact on your business. And that happens in two ways, right? You actually get the near-term impact of getting that money back for lost or damaged freight. But what I also hear you saying is you can start to use that data to really improve your carrier selection, down to the lane level or even down to the item level, right? And that's really valuable to feed that data back within the system. Is that a fair summary?
Oh yeah, no question, no question. I mean, I look at one of our large retailers based out of Dallas, and they ship a lot of consumer products using the small parcel carriers. And I can tell you, based on the data that comes out of our application, they have changed the way they ship the product to certain zip codes or certain areas because of the losses they've experienced. And again, most of their products are high value. They're shipped via small parcel. As we all know, FedEx, UPS, I mean, they limit the liability on the claims. So whatever you could do to reduce that impact, it will benefit the customer, will benefit the shipper and their bottom line.
Well, Pete, thank you very much. For the sake of time, I think we're going to start to move into sort of our wrap up here. I do want to thank you, Pete, for walking through the claims and settlement space. Again, another area just like order compliance that maybe not everybody on the phone is familiar with. For the audience, again, we are nearing the end here. We're going to do a final little wrap up. If you have any questions, please do submit them, as Michael had alluded to. We've covered a lot of ground today in terms of automation and visibility across the shipment lifecycle. And Steve, I kind of want to come back to you and, here, how do you think this all ties together? What's the big picture takeaway? And, how do we look ahead, thinking about automation and visibility across all these different phases of a shipment?
Yeah, it's a great, we think of this, or we present it sort of start with as a linear kind of process, right? But it isn't, right? And you pointed out, right? What this claims process, we feed the data back into the selection process to make sure early on we're making the right decisions, right? And it's that sort of interaction, whether it's the claims or maybe it's think of order compliance. Well, if the supplier isn't compliant or if their process takes a long time, that can start to determine lead times or even change the sourcing of an order, right? Think of what Bobby talked about in a simulation, feeding that back into not just into the process at the final mile level, but even back into where the TMS is determining whether this is a LTL move, a parcel move, or a final mile move, right? And those things, really make a big difference in not just the life cycle, but in the cost effectiveness and efficiencies of what goes on.
I think that's a really good summary. And one thing you've alluded to, and Don, I just want to invite you to lend as well, is adaptability, right? Adaptability, because we know conditions today are going to change. Automation we need today isn't going to be the automation that perhaps we need tomorrow. Right. Don, when I say adaptability and you think about looking ahead, what comes to mind for you?
Well, for an organization's supply chain compliance operations as a whole, adaptability is, a key objective because it needs to be embedded in both their processes, their collaboration, both internally and externally, as well as the digital tools that they bring to bear. So, a key challenge that we find that businesses are facing in digitizing that whole supply chain compliance space is prioritizing what's practical. It's important to keep in mind several, key things like technology is there really to facilitate, not complicate. So it's best to outline how any platform you'll adopt will simplify and automate your processes in an adaptable way. By avoiding the innovation for sake of innovation, your business can fuel up for long haul with a real pragmatic, sustainable approach to this overall supply chain compliance management space. Secondly, get ready because you're going to have supplier diversification and it's only going to continue to expand. And nearshoring, offshoring, changes of locales and things like that continue to cause chaos in your overall supplier community. So any digital platform you adopt needs to be ready to operate across those geographies and regulatory frameworks that then are applied to where you're sourcing product from. So it's definitely a very practical application for that effective, digital supply chain compliance platform should be able to cut through that overall diversity that you're going to have in your sourcing network and inform your decision making that you're trying to make. And so that's, several areas that we find that are, very critical to having success in this space.
Well, Don, thank you for that. And I do want to say thank you to you and to Pete and to Bobby and to Steve again for all that you covered. Again, I know it was a lot. I do think it's a good time for us to pause and take some questions. I think, Michael, I saw a couple questions coming in on the dashboard here. I'm going to hand it over to you to queue those up.
That's right, Nick. Thanks very much. Our panel provided a lot of great information. And with a little bit of time we have remaining, we do want to be fielding some of the questions from your audience. I do see we've got a couple of them already. To submit your questions, just open the Q&A panel at the bottom of your webinar viewer. We'll respond to as many as possible with the remaining time. If we're not able to get to your question, we'll follow up after our event. So it looks like the first question here, it goes a little bit back towards Don's conversation around supply chain compliance. So in addition to the opportunities to apply autonomous technologies to first mile areas, how can organizations improve global visibility and the ability to proactively identify risks in their supply chain?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely a focus needed on expanding that visibility across those supplier tiers that your organization has in their sourcing network. And if you expect your visibility is lacking, don't feel alone. It's a difficult challenge to overcome. It reminds me of a McKinsey study I just recently read from it was late last year, where 80% of companies in the consumer products and retail sectors, they believe their transparency across those supplier tiers is insufficient. So it's a widespread issue that everybody's trying to grapple with. However, organizations that we find that invest in that supplier visibility, they're much better positioned to be able to minimize losses and boost productivity. And so if God forbid a recession does hit later this year, organizations need to be ready. So 3 areas come to mind, just real briefly, to drive discussions between your global sourcing, your supply chain, and transportation functions to improve the visibility and adaptability across those areas. First, identify segments in your supply chain that are most vulnerable and craft a strategies that can be supported by digital tools and partner collaboration. Next, we'd suggest identify your current state of your digital capabilities at each stage of your network and fill the gaps with appropriate solutions. And then lastly, identify areas where you lack access to data that's impacting your decision support and identify solutions to both collect that data that's needed and maintain the flow of accurate, value-rich information. So if you're able to prioritize investment in those type of visibility initiatives, you'll become much more agile and resilient to ever-changing conditions that you're going to experience.
Great information.
And if I could just add one thing here. It's interesting, we always think about the automation, the setup, the capturing of knowledge into the systems, but it's a lot more than that. And one of the interesting, if you think of order compliance, think about when rules change, when things change in the, not that distant future, you would document these processes, procedures, email them out, or, distribute them out, and then hope people adhere to the new stuff, right? And then put measurements in. Now you can change your system and it automatically enforces those new rules, right? And it's a big step, right? And it's a huge piece to make sure that it's not just the initial setup, but it's the ongoing communication of those changes. So.
Thank you, gentlemen. Great information. And we are arriving at the conclusion of our time. I want to thank everybody for sharing that information. Special thanks to Nick Wilson for leading that conversation, and to our panel of founders, Steve Blau, Pete Celestino, Bobby Darrell, Don Mabry. Thank you all for sharing a lot of great information. To learn more about MercuryGate smart transportation solutions and the automation and visibility tools that we've discussed here today, visit MercuryGate.com. That's where you can find out about our TMS, our claims management, final mile, and all our visibility solutions for your modern supply chain challenges. Also, access regular transportation industry updates at our Knowledge Center. Look for the logistics landscape in the industry reports section of our resources page. You get updated economic indicators, news insights from our Export Center partners. On behalf of Nick Wilson, our panel of MercuryGate founders, and everyone at MercuryGate International, thank you for joining us for this look at the logistics landscape.